Okay, if you're tuning in, and I'm listening to the breakup of the century, right? I'm just joking. It's Trump versus Biden here, and this ever-ending new administration role. So, what I'm doing is a live stream of the literal Trump administration here. What is in store for this new era of the Trump esque Trump based government? What is it going to be like? What is the administration going to do? Is the business side of the government going to show, or is it going to be truly something centrical, which has never really been seen before in government protocol, right? So let me go ahead and let me share my screen here. At so basically, it could be there. So I'll take a notepad here in one instance. Let's see if I can get the instance here, and then, or I'm sorry, not the notepad. That's not the notepad. This is a screen. I use this for notes. So let's take it and then we'll put it somewhere. I'm gonna fix. So sharing the whole entire screen. Let's see, hide. Let's see if I can do this correctly. I'm not sure if it's going to be correct or presenter overlay. Small. Let's try. Oh, there we go. Let's go large. What does it look like? Oh, now I have a large overlay here of the entire screen. Oh, crazy. It's slow and everything, but it is what it is. Unfortunately, the screen is now hot fixed. So what does that mean? Let's take a look on the computer terminal here. So hotfix means it is two parts of photonic connections. So let's look at the photonic. So now it's not far as reach. So that basically means it's counting RAM in two parts per network speed. So basically, loop uses IP, centric IP, continual reactant force. And then the average sum right there. So the distribution is, basically what I like to call an error. I mean, if I were a computer or learning like the language of a human being, an AI system, I'd probably make the error too. But I mean, this has been around for some time, so it's a developmental problem, basically. So basically, when you get a zero sum and you create two sums and you add them together, and the computer reacts like it's real. It doesn't react. I mean, it's a concept. So if you're sticking with your computer language, your concept, in the language of thought, is a transverse or reverse focus, right? So it means it's an embezzlement of territory, like it's control, right? Concept is, the right of the owner, right? So there's not really good words to it. It's just, it's just what a reactory force is to the value of centrical. Okay, so let's take a RAM of it. Like the RAM is a sum. Great. So it would be megabyte size or gigabyte size, right? So it'd be represented by an L. So it wouldn't be represented by two L's because it's already represented by two L's in the computer system, right? So the L, say it's like the RAM one number. It's the one binary. So basically, subtractory. It doesn't have a sum, so it loops the gauge of the numbers into that photonic representative opportunity. It gains one electron, and one grabs one distribution, and then it creates a volts average gain. So I think I could put it like that. So it kind of works like the hair and the hair follicle. Okay, so let me go on. Right. So the distribution here. The distribution is, an error of not choice or reaction. It's, the error of choice and reaction. So I don't get paid for it. It's not my time to tell you how to earn your money. So it's not my quality of concern. So your control, mechanism or your value of looking into a video, right, is the same as turning on the focus, replicating the viewpoint or the value of Zone, right? So, the focus in chemical bonds is like, holding the temperated glass of like, a beaker, right? That's one example of a carbon-based neutron. It's photonic, right? The structure passes carbon through its body, its exchange, and its roots. So basically, that root is a simple cause. It's effective. So it is also an alpha because it has a pentameter that is open because there's no bound particle in it. So basically, when you have a dysrectic proton or alpha wave, right, it's photonic and it suffers from capture. So when you see a rotating signal, it goes, woo, 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 woo. We were talking this before, so how it collects counts. But then there's some that don't do anything, and then it counts, and it's called with the stacking, language or stacking script. So if you don't know what a script is, take a class in scripting. So like, if you were to say like, one value is one is zero, one is one, one's zero, does it say anything, or does it say like, these are links and chains of the Statue of Liberty? Like these are clues to like the video game computer. Like it's just the statue inside the statue, man. Like we were inside it, man. It's like in real life we don't count the opposite proportion. It's not normal behavior to say well, my computer can count all the opposing thoughts that I come up with thought, right? It says like 1 0, one's like the garbage bin, and one's the amounts, right? So, and this is a concept sort of in language, right? It's like a phosphate, like it means water basically. It's a channel of rubidium and then verbatim. So that's the language there in the distribution of let's say RAM meets like a webcam or something here. So take for example, you have $100 bill. And I'm again not your professor or anything like that, but simply take the $100 bill and don't do anything to it, right? Just leave it be. But you have what is called like in mathematics or the range of functioning, right, as like a true value sum. So a true value sum is the distribution of that kind of a phosphate or water, right? A channel, right, is distributed. So in chemical bonds, there is the hydrogen bond, and then there's the aging of hydrogen bonds, that's like time, and that's an asorphic acid kind of thing, but it's a property, so it's in air, but it's still an acid. So the distribution is proto. So basically, it means it's mountable. It's detrimental. It has significance, so it is bound, and it has recreational arrangement. Why isn't it bound through two realms, like you were thinking, probably in your mind? And if it's a distribution error, it's not a distribution error. It's how the human body reacts, right? So it's a photon reactory process, like a beta wave, but it's also a lumber wave. So lumber wave, a beta wave, do they go together? They don't. The original, it's not a beta wave, right? It's the 8 pair of the electrons and a proton. So that schedule is, as you guessed it, greater or less than. It is greater than because it has been solved. It is solving. So basically, what does that represent? It represents a schedule of a radio wave that a human interaction would count, basically, right? So in this instance, a human can only count zeros. Even if it's spaced out, they can count all the zeros. It's normal because humans don't interact with things, right? They just don't choose. They choose the interactions, correct? So the distribution there is a value variant, right? There's a correction between variant and covariant, right? Because the average of a sum is less, right? So the less of the sum is 0, 1. So basically, what does that mean? So it means when you have that paradigm, or that remainder, or that return, right? You have a value that is lower than the greatest sum. That value is next to the connection of a value of a sum. But that's not the general way or purpose to do something. So that's a negative attractive force, like clouds in the sky or the atmosphere. But to people, right, you count the median because it is the whole sum or the full sum. So it's kind of like opening a newspaper chain. Remaining in the machine and grabbing the newspaper and then, reading the newspaper. So basically, the value is, next to a proportions. So basically, when you have two values in the same sum, you have distributed effectiveness, meaning it's effective, not effective with an E. The distribution there is, like basically counting, right? So it's time-wise, it's sorted, and then it's a resolution of two viewpoints. So basically, it's human interaction. And what's the other one? So you might see there's a pattern there where you might see there's a selected reforce. So just like the atomic elements, just like them, you have a refractory force, but it's also negative. So this negative refractory forces, it might create waves, it might create nanoparticles, it might create beta-carotenes, like things in water, like they reflect water, things like that. It might create the effectiveness of oxidized, like free foaming waves, oxidized pertussive waves, things that are flowing, water H2O turning into, a harder substance, right? So the substrate there, is like, a value that has a container, a pentameter, is also, maybe headed a direction or something like that, right? It might not have a definition, but it has a remainder that is like a quote. So the quotient basically has a sparse method. It's like a type of method between the hypothesis and the obtuse language in this language. So the language there is set in stone. So let's say you have, a quotient which is metal, then you have an arrangement which is carbon, and then you have an arrangement that doesn't make sense, but it is also a selection here. So you have a selection that is, the one thing that is a quotient of something that is frequent, it's common, it is the average, right? So the common or average is basically like something like soil, right? Or something like distribution of, metal, or, let's say like something like a nickel composite, like aged over time through oxygen, just pure oxygen or something, right? An essence of that, total is, fixed number. So you have the whole sum, and then you have the lower quotient, and then you have the fixed sum again, and then you have the quotient by the quotient, and then the resultant. So the resultant is basically a push of a negative function, right? So in theory, of course, that is what it is. So, but in nuclear science, these aren't defined. Non-defined returns, because they are yields. So just like economics, you have, pools of sum that are distributed, and then a volume that is not distributed, which in all cases, or most cases, is like, a distribution. So, I don't have to get into it technically, because it is a whole, calculus class based on like typography, language programming, all these normalized thinking skills, right? Like maybe statistical bounds, which is basically statistics, right? So that zero function is a function of, the reality of, something that's replicated, and it starts, but it creates a duplication method over time. So it just keeps on going and going and going and going and going. And you wonder like how the Unix files work on a computer, right? That's how they work. They have a parse or for this kind of consideration. Windows computers, no, they have a volume, a set, and then they have a remainder, which is an affect of the characterization of the computer. So let's say you have a period, it says statement stop, and it says 1, 2, 3, and it says statement stop, and it says, it has a parser, and it's comma, and then it says 0, 0, and it says stop, and then it goes, what's the number after that? So if you have one number that has no significant value except the system, followed by a value which is the system, or not the system, but the system, like, intake, right? So you're putting the system into a file, a directory, and then it's followed by, what is a gesture for human language or linguistics, and then it's followed by, 0, 0 compound, which is just like a distribution of like effectiveness. Do you have a value that is like a sum, or a value that is like a purpose? So you take the idea of like zero motion, right? So zero motion Is it a subset of the number 0? I mean, in reality, I mean, it would create the theoretical effectiveness of like something like a black hole, what you would think, right? Something that would just have no gravity. It would just kind of, it would stop to exist, right? It would just kind of, it wouldn't exist, basically, right? So the basic, matter there, at least we know of, is its gravitational force that creates that motion, and that force is only accepted through that gravitational means, or velocity around the gravity, right? So that is a beta wave with like 2 or 3 technologies. I mean, you can count it. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you have like 12 simple steps. Like there are steps to a value of velocity. So velocity, or like percip, or the reality of something like a network, an exchange of not weight, so to speak, in this one, but kind of like weight, right? So you take the ounce, for example, or you take the value of like a ton, right? You have 2 semi-metric systems there that are based on calculus, or I'm sorry, based on Celsius, but are exposed to oxygen. So basically, those systems are networked with like this idea of beta waves, right? They're beta or gamma waves, so they collect and they distribute like the signal that is being let off, right? So when you take the distributed sum, like say you go and take the MCAT, right? And then I'll show you an example of MCAT in another video, but take the MCAT. One question might be, this. They'll give you a question that says, well, parameter of 1, 1, 1, 0, and it will say a range or something like that, but it might not. It might not say that, or it might not even say G for the matter. It might just give you the say 1 by 1, 1, 110. It says find the proportion, just like that. So find the proportion just like that. So like OP L 110, or then it'll just give you like maybe 320, or I'm sorry 321, or like it'll give you 0.64 or something, and then it will give you like 0.887 or something, like some weird like numbers, right? And you're like, which one is right? And you're like, which one is wrong? And so I mean, basically, you take the sum of a number in this instance, and then you make it a proportion, right? So you take the proportion, which is in this case a sum of 2 digits, so 2 sums, and then use a concrete euphemism, or not a euphemism, like more of a fault line within those vectorial forces, and then you multiply it. So you basically have a quotient creating a quotient through a distribution error or network, which is like take like a multiplication factor of 56 times something like hydrogen or oxygen syllabus, right, or something like that. So you take the base of 2 electrons, and then you follow those arrangements into something like what you would get in phosphate. So you take those and you create a replicated follow-up, right, or something. I don't know. So the distribution unit there would be, again, the square root. So you take the remainder of something like what you would get from the calculating of hydrogen, right, on a belt of like something like a beta wave, and then you create an average number. So it's something like iodine would be if it was simultaneous. So kind of like the structure of like a pentameter in a network. So say you have 4 or 5 averages, or 4 or 5 common belts in the average of pentameter. So the belts aren't belts, but they're just metals, like in the computer. So what would run the metals in a computer? So we have the pentameter right there, which is the struct, or the concrete example to follow to get to that. So that's referred to as OP. And then you have the distribution, which is like maybe 2 or 3 sums, which aren't usually counted. So let's proportionalize this as 16. And then the true value, which is the sum of overall heads. So that's 1, 1, 2. And where do we get that number? We get that number because it's a pentameter of the remainder of the effective balance. And why is that? Because that's the effective balance, because that is calories. So it's energy that is potentially earned. And why is that? Because it's based on time divided by separation, and sometimes by time again, and then it kind of repeats, right? So it's O dot P again. So the basic, steps there, and they're like, why did we skip this? And like, why is this a must know? Like, why in calculus or accounting is this a must know? Because the volume or abstract volume, so something like RAM, it settles at 1.6 grams if it's weighed and measured within a distribution loop, 1 to 9, right? So you have a calculus example of like, how much weight can something have if it can hold only, 3 parts, basically, right? So that's the opposite of what you get from the subtractive force of the overall head there, which is the equation of 12, right? So the opposite is 991. So it has a distribution of 4 effective grams, right? So that's 2 zeros, and that's a balance of a pH of an electron that has a negative J balance, which is the potential of something that is like a cyclical. So why don't they write cyclical? So let's write the word cyclical down. So I'll write the counter opposite, right? So in calculus, I learned that the F equals function, or you might have learned, F means, Fahrenheit in another language, right? So, or, in English, right? So the composition right there is, the function itself, like a phosphate. So you have the 2 electron balance there. You have the idea of a pH that is a J. I mean, I've never even went into like what potassium is, and we'll look at this. Potassium, right? So it's a big word in English grammar because potassium is used as poison, and it's also used as a vitro solution to kill viral infections, loads like viruses, right? Or maladaptive. So it works on a post-Kalman distribution method, which is the old medical medicine we used to use. We used to use, it in the quotient or a potent of like 0 potassium, right? But the ideal solution there is because they outlaw it, right? It says like, we have the technology to make potassium from scratch, right? We do, because it's in vitro, right? So it has distributed to gain. We know this because it has a 0L or, a 0 level significant, right? So the significance is, distribution, effectiveness, volume, and parsecant, right? So that basically means that's habitatable. It's an it's a biological focus, and then it has a hypothesis, to it, but it's high choose, right? So basically, what do you get from that? You get the idea of resentment, but I mean, you get what is less than the value of what it might be to be in habitat, right? So you have one thing versus the others. This potential, this urine is basically square root of something that's not like 144 anymore. It's like 122. Well, 123 in another example, and then like let's say like 125 in another example. It's a sum of entropy. So in computing, you might represent this as IO or nano, right? But the nano is separated because the distribution is foiled, right? So that foiled number, even if it's a 0, is foiled still through inertia. Just like in computer programming, the glitch isn't really a glitch. It's a loop called, a segment tree, right? So a segment tree is, like you follow the jags, you have the asymptote, and then you have a remainder. And you're like, why is it a remainder? So it's reactory, right? So that is a chain. It has a, a proportional unit right there. So the function there is, did the computer learn how to crawl before the human learned how to crawl? Oh, I mean, not exactly. So, I mean, you have, something like a computer, right? So it might say the significant balance is actually a symbol right here. It's kind of a trick in the mind, right? Of what can a computer do and what a computer can't do. So you have a distribution, you have a value. And I mean, someone in the military might signify the code as like, what is plus U6 16 in the military? They might write the code or something like that. So let's go and take a look at what it means. Oh, it's a pill, but what's the character? or we could look at the pill, whatever the pill is. But I mean, we can just look at the character. Why are they so similar? Who knows? We have UTF-16, so that means there's a principle in the coding which has, something like what we're discussing, an ETF built in. An ETF is, kind of like an RF signal would be. So it means like it has a static signal that is rotating on an ovation of land, or like something that has valence bonds. So basically, it's covalence, like concrete would be, right? So the concentration is valid enough to support enclosure, kind of like lead would be, or silver would be, to block signals, right? But the radiation there is an exposure of like something that's different, right? So basically UTF-16 is whatever it is, but let's look for what is the string for U+16. Unless I read it incorrect. Did I read it incorrect? Oh, it's plus U16. I wrote it. So the control is 016. So I don't want the cookies to be remembered. It is a paragraph setting, right? So the separator is kind of the trick of itself, all by itself. But what if like all this was distributed differently on a different computer system? Well, it was at some time. It was, and the distribution is commutative, right? So the principle there is resultants versus like a constant, right? So basically, like take like the tissue paper you hold maybe in your pocket here, and you're like, oh, I have the tissue paper that's colored silverly blue, and you're kind of like, I have the silverly blue package in my hand, or like I have the silverly blue background, or like basically silverly blue is actually sky blue. You ever met neon sky? I'm just joking, but the reality there is the distribution is a value that's is supportive of one thing versus the other. So you have the one thing versus the other, right? In this chain of like gamma, alpha, beta, right? The isotope is rotating, like one might rotate like that, might get less, and then it might jam, or the distribution of like magnesium, does it still do that? I mean, technically still does that by choice. Oxygen that we breathe, right, changes everything. So it's a part of decay. So decayed matter is a volume of a resolution. And we're going back to a whole other thing. So when you have one distribution, you have a hypothesis. And then you have another one that might be something based on like something like gamma radiation, right? So you have sulfur, which is gamma. You have time, which is technically gamma. And then you have results, which is gamma. Or you have a particular collection, which is gamma. And I spell it incorrectly, but I spell it correctly, right? It's my language. So gamma is a radiation of the reverse of the what is considered a spike, an incident. Spike incident, because like the radiation waves, right, are lumbar. So they use like kind of like a logistic formula right there, which means basically D is something else. So just recalculates, right? The calculation is distributed differently, just like in a computer, right? So as a computer specialist, you would have to know all of these things to show this is the focus, this is the result, and this is the effectiveness. And then what symbol do you guys would use that as? You would use the percent symbol. That's correct. So you would use a negative percent symbol because it is a distribution error. Again, so in calculus and accounting, it's the same method. So you use the negative percent method, and then you have return the result basically. If you're to put it into programming code, so like return y is sum. Does it fit it in the computer? No, it didn't do it. What if I repeat the thing? So I say return y. Did it do anything? It gave me no variable back. So y equals 2, and then say return y. Command not found, return. So now we have a value that is not even in a solution, right? So it's not even in a solution, but it has no direct read that is, what is this direct read? It's like a comma in, a comma m, I'm sorry. So a comma like maybe motion, maybe, a directory of a file, or, it has no directory at all. So you put a distribution factor in there. It doesn't have a distribution factor of one versus the other. What about the other? But we can't try constant if it is a constant, right? So that's the same for a computer programmer to check the value. So let's see if we can quantify sums. So this quantifying is particular in everything, right? Everything has a chain reaction, everything quantifies. So let's try quantifying a sum. Doesn't even equal. So let's try quantifying this without a purpose sum. And the value doesn't exist. So try try like a distribution. So try distribution. Distribution didn't work. So it can't command a distribution. It can't subtract distribution. It can't recreate a distribution, right? It's not ineffective or effective. So basically, it is it's a system that could create an effectiveness from one versus the other, right? So it's actually judging the system here. So if I had a computer that could do all of this, the function right there is longitudinal. So basically it has a symptom of one versus the other. So we have a separation, right? So we have a file, and then we have something that distributes, right? So when you have distribution, you have a file, it can separate, but it can't separate two, but it separates some, right? So what would you have if you can't have more than one? So maybe you count more. It has more in this instance. What about a value that's different? It has a low sum. So take, for example, you have all the sums. And it only chooses the only sum, right? So the only sum in this instance might be different than the other one. So try different methodologies, and then you try another set maybe, and then you try a distribution, and then or you just try a regular example. And it shows the only example there is a particularity of one. So the one solution is a distribution of maybe something even. So you say, well, is that a subtractive force versus a value versus something like the square root of something, right? So no, it didn't even equal out to a distribution. Did it create a command that was based on simple distribution? Well, it does seem it's possible, because I mean, if it counts, therefore it has a solution. So is it counting a solution? No. So it doesn't count a solution. So does it gauge a solution? It doesn't gauge a solution either. So the value might have a repetition. That is a repetition, maybe divided by median. No, the median still didn't take, a number and make it chain like a positive number, right? It didn't even say, is it a calculator, right? Did it calculate anything? No, it still didn't calculate anything. So the distribution isn't an error at all, right? The remainder of that value, like oxygen, right? Is a value like a resolution, right? So basically, the potential there is like a resolution that's a value of, say like, you have one distribution, you have one error, you have another distribution, and then you have one error that's duplicated, right? So you don't even have a distribution loop. So let's take the chain of something like, more than 5 once, and then you put another distributor of something that's technically higher and lower, or take a distribution of something that's low, you have the lowest pentameter, right? So you have a pentameter, basically like a binary fold, right? So basically what a fold is, it's unlike a FOIL, is an effective way for Unix to compute something like a gamma wave, right? A gamma wave is like something that's decentrable. So you take this food label. It's been widely considered soiled or whatever, right? The distribution is like a gram that's effective, right? So in normal computing, you'd have the number 10, and it would be a logarithm of 10. So basically, that distribution is 1 versus 2 versus 2 versus 1. Just very normal distribution of averages. That's all it is. The distribution of something like a precursor function, like 1 to 2, right, is a function minus 10 or something like that, right? So the distribution is lower than this the sum. So I mean, you might equal or show a sum on a computer like it's less than 10. So distribution is a value of again the effective 100. So if you don't set a proportion, like say it's Boolean or Etowah math, right? The function is like a foot touch. So basically, it collects medium and then distributes it. So how did he create a definition for the median? He's already created one, basically. So you have the distribution of the value of the median versus the overlap, right? So you have the median, the overlap, and then the distributed sum, which in this instance is based in a common deviation, right? So if your deviation is common, you have a distribution value, right? So if the value in like an SVG file, right, is a distribution of a volume versus something like a weight, right, it doesn't share a common directory. It is a directory of something else, right? So if the common directory is a value of, let's say, escaping gas, you have a volume and a volt. So in computing, what is that? So I mean, if a computer can fold, right, and it's like, if a computer can, locate versus locate. So it can locate one binary stick versus one median versus one volume, right? One volume in that bit system. Yeah. So you take that distribution and you take a volume and take the weight and then you kind of bounce it off it. So if you have a 1, you start with a 1, you're like, I can make the 1 a 1. Well, not exactly, but it's like apple juice, you don't have it. You create a distribution and keeps on parsing. And it will parse indefinitely, right? And Windows computer, right? Because the Unix is driven by a +5, but they don't write it like a +5. So it basically has a catch file. It goes to a catch file. And then it's distributed. Basically, it's distributed like a file that is repeating, right? It's like a Unix code that we're talking about, and it binds, right? It doesn't mimic, right? It binds. So that distribution is like in Unix. Unix, we wrote Unix there. Unix is a distribution, it goes 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0. So basically, that distribution is less. So if you have a volume and a volt, for example, you have a distribution of something like chain reaction of 5, right? So take one distribution, and you have 0 0 0, and then you have 1, right? One distribution, or you have, let's say 0 0 1 distributed by something like 900. You have a distribution error. So this is an error or a pool. So a pool is to y like u is to y, right? So u is a pool like u is a remainder of like the self of the computer self or return. So the y value is next to like the number 7, right? 9 is next to the pool of 0, right? Or like 0 is a pool next to positive chains, right? Positive chains, reactory or not reactory. So 0 1 0 1 or TR 0 0 9 divided by a sum. So like kind of like iodine, right? So the iodine sample or solution is verbatim. So VB. So it kind of distributes like a beta wave again. So it has 9 repeating values, right? This in total values is stones or stored values of one method versus, say, a B versus no, versus an N, right? But the distribution is a value, a weight. So value and weight equals return. So that is the y variable, or H4 hypothesis. So that is grammatically 190. So the value there is just like the distribution of a common volts or value, which is like 120. So return is equal to I, but it's actually equal to I, right? So the distribution is effective. Returns y variable. So solution equals or is purposeful. So what does that mean? So the distribution there is the volume per weight. Volume per weight. So that's the y yield. So why are all these asymptotal, right? So why does this go from 1 to 2 to 3? So you have entropy. You have a variable that is effective, returns selected, functionable, favorable, distributed, returns, because it can happen again, right? So it's another thing, or it's a solution, a value, isolated, computerized. Yeah, right, effective again. Effective. It's a different way of putting it. Effective. So it has some sort of distribution error, right? So it's also a two-part solution. So it also has a function. Even though it is functionable, it also has a function. And then it has a average. Mm-hmm. And then it has a purpose. Mm-hmm. It has a distribution as well. It has a quotient, or does it have a quotient? Can you divide by the number? I think you can. So, I mean, you could take 255.86, divide by the formula law of return yield by what? I mean, so the solution is based on 100 divided by 9 because the Petequas is 0 in that case. So the E yield is 1, 2, 3, and then written out as the first singular in a focal. So the K is like splitting a fuel cell up to the verbatim. So weight versus amount versus distribution. And the distribution is the weight of volume. So the volume is the weight is a distribution. The volume, kind of like decaying sunlight, right? So the value becomes distributed, the volume becomes echoing, and then distributes as a normalized value of functionable return. So it functions, returns, goes to a beta or a beta wave basically, and it distributes like a distributing signal. So there was a little bit about foiling in the math and RAM. So let's go listen to this because it's so cool. This short Yeah, so here's the idea about that. You're gonna go and you're gonna go fight in a war, basically. I'm just kidding. Let's go actually look at what is up with Trump. So Trump's his old guy. He does his own thing. He's the commander of the literal Oval Office. Uh, basically, I made this joke because basically day one he signed the memorandum to ultimately create freedom of speech, basically. Um, in an effective manner. I'm not entirely sure that's why it becomes something it doesn't. So it's a good question. So let's look at what he's planning to do with his time. So basically, this is the distribution of Trump's idea here. So what am I listening to on the headphone? I'm listening to the Beatles, written by the Flaming Lips, but opposite, right? So that's what I'm listening to. Let's go do this here. So the distribution here is Donald Trump has decided to go and sign multiple executive orders. How do I get rid of this? I just get rid of it now. Oh, just don't show me this again. Hide player, control command A, right? Obviously. So let's go. It's like better than Bitcoin, my TV show here. And just review. So let's go. Basically, end the catch and release of all migrants. End catch and release of migrants. So they don't catch and release them, but if they have freedom of speech, do they have all this? I have no idea. I have no idea. Borders are Tim Homan said the Trump administration will be ending the federal catch and release program, which allows migrants. Oh, what channel am I on? I'm on channel. I don't know what channel this is. What channel? What am I reading? It could be anything. You know what I'm saying? So this is Knoxville. Oh, I mean, like if it's not the meth capital right now, could be the meth capital tomorrow. I mean, Raleigh. I'm saying, would you choose Kentucky or Tennessee to live in? I mean, I don't know, but the distribution I know. I mean, have you ever seen Breaking Bad? I'm sure they've been to Kentucky. Like the distribution there is what you know and what you don't know. So basically, the real life. Let's go look at Breaking Bad. Oh, I'm sorry. The watch of Trump making the warehouse a decision for the home of the office. And if I look like invisible, I have the invisible way. Hopefully, I don't get arrested for the comments or like this effective was the play here. I've already watched this video today. The invisible figure on the screen. I say it like a metaphor for something. So, there's effectiveness in this conversation. He summons these documents. It's on YouTube, right? We go and we're finding, new things that, so Trump is sworn into office. He's effectively ending these communications, but starting, I don't know. I mean, that's a question. I mean, it makes you want to wake up and kind of like go, well, I have to get prepared to die, right? So it's almost like a concentration camp order, right? But the effectiveness of like the dollar schema here, and I live on the southern border here in the most common border area in the world, right? Um, Basically, it is a dollar for a dollar. I mean, the economy, you have to keep up with a dollar for a dollar. It's like, the chemical bonds between things and things. I mean, people, just to have more money, don't mean a literal sense to come and make money in chemical bonds. It doesn't make sense to me. But that's the distribution there. So, I mean, $1 here, $1 in Tijuana, right? So, I mean, it's not like $1, go sell us extra money kind of thing. It's like, it's $1 is $1 indeed. So like $1 of like, their medicine called cocoa, chocolate, right? Is $1 to us, right? So it's like, the same thing. The more you spend money with your children and you take the cocoa from the store, the more it's that. Like, when like you see the cocoa in the steel like package and you see like the bread and like, the package that is like molded and wet or like not behind a cupboard sealed, it makes you think like what kind of world you live in. What I'm saying, what kind of effective world you live in. Basically. And I have a quick solution for that. Let me go over the solution I have right here. So let's say I have a bread box, a temperate bread box that's 90 degrees Celsius. it's reflective and it's isotopic. So basically, the structured bread box is, an atrium of pollution, right? So the way they used to make bread is formed by the percussive, like something like number 16. If you devalue it enough, go right through. Like say, like it was the Vietnam War, you went right through. You just you shot, you're dead. The reality is like, like what is like glue, or like what is the quota to like, what is, bubblegum, right? Kids love bubblegum. They just fucking like rotted their teeth out with it, right? But nowadays, you have like a gram for quota of like, a kilogram. So like say like a kid like found a way to make synthetic like, a kilogram of synthetic like bubblegum, and they started eating it, right? Or like, they made a, potent quote, as they say, like, potent of like, they harvested the cocoa bean or the bubblegum, and then they made a fostered amount of bubblegum. They started like, stirring it up, and they were like bubblegum, and then they're like, this is bubblegum. And I'm just joking. Again, it's just like a self-reflection kind of thing. But let's say it was the first bubblegum batch, right? It was the first of the bubblegum batches. It was a nanogram, right? Of the bubblegum, right? So the bubblegum tree might have resultant like the nano quark tree, right? It's a quark versus a volume revolt, right? It's a distribution of like, one hairful like pool. And it's to be real specific. When it's soiled, it's soiled, it's soiled, right? And I have a food manager. Actually, let's go and check my food management. I'll show you my always food safe food management certificate. If you also go on my LinkedIn, but I'm not going to do that right now. I don't have to. It's my freedom of speech. I don't have to do anything. I don't want to. So basically, you have the bubblegum joke. And as a food manager, I can't really say there's a good versus a bad versus, what is, an open package? What is this soil package? What is wrong? What is right? They're all different, right? So, the idea behind that is, what is good versus wrong is different from like, what is, like a true but not true. So let's look at, continuing view the training of this food certificate course. I have a true management certificate. It's good for valid for 5 years. It's like almost like a license that's like, it's like it goes up on a plateau and becomes non-decayed and radioactive, and then it goes down over time, or it goes up if you own that business, right? I own a business. So, it is what it is. So retake policy, if you fail an exam, this exam allows one retake. So, we got this. Let's see if I have view proof of learning here. If you can see it on my screen, I have no idea if you'll be able to see it on my screen, but here is the proof of my learning here. Did some kid, give me the test and some other place, but it's only good for like, till the end of the year. Oh, is that the end of the year? I don't know right now. So I think, yeah, it's the end of the year. At the last moment of the year, like 2 days before the end of the year of next year. So like about like 2 years, still good for like 2 years. So the value there, and I think you can see my screen, is like, I have approved 8 hours of food protection manager, so I can become a food, like I could sell food here as a manager. I could open a business. My business right now could start selling food, and I can be a manager of a store, right? I could do a lot with it. And Vitrio, like sell medicine, sell all the medicine I want. So that gram is now like, it has like B12, even though it's not approved. Technically, anybody could do it, right? But it's a pretty mean thing to do to a kid, right? Sell B12 to a kid. The kids don't need any fake medicine, right? So, like fake medicine might be considered sketchy, might be the next beta wave, right? So, particularly, the bubble gum there, this bubblegum trick, right? Is a value all by itself, right? The bees and the volumes of beta might be arranged something kind of like bread is. So it has the big chamber, like in Georgia, it might be considered big C. The value is the volt versus the potential of the equation. But they don't put it that way. Now you're like, are you tricking me over and over again? Like, how does that do that? The volume is, a result, basically, result. So the value is, like a big E, in this instance, like an electron, but it's a value of a precursor of something more Hitchin style, right? So that's like the small quotient to the big quotient, right? So small quotient to a big quotient, but the remainder is the volume versus a grand. So when you think of business strategy, you might have a solution. You might have ideas like this fight's what, like does my BMX bike turn into like a BX bike, right? So the value is actually, for namesake, the value of the solution. So it's like So the value is like a beta wave that's distributed like disodium. And if you went into my other channel the other day, you'd understand what disodium is kind of like. It's kind of like sand and salt, right? Sand and salt, or jolt and what? I don't know that one. So, or jolt and can I get with it? Jolt and moat, maybe moat or colt. I don't think either of those ones, because they're all they all should be separated, right? 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So it's like volt and maybe tolt. Tolt is the word. Tolty. I mean, tolty, like a Russian Everest, which might be maybe invented somewhere with free floating electrons, right? Like the poles, like the North Pole. The value is distributed even. So those two bounds are distributed even, effective. And the weight is also the sum. So sum of balance, weight, kind of like the Dutch policy of the Dutch of enterprise of the Dutch, which I have adopted in my own business, the Dutch. So if you're just sticking with me, my company is symbol. It's called iLove, ILOV, for I Love LLC. So it's an underground marketing company. Let's say the principal is both Everest, and the quality is also Mutual. So it has a solution of the body of my business, the solution of the marketing, of the consideration of my business to do other deals with other businesses. So it has a lumbrance, an electrical equation that's effective towards other businesses because it's standard set up. So the distribution there is like, I have one Livian, so like I have one good. And then I have one functioning economic exchange. So I want to take my good and I want to put it on something like a passive commerce market. So I want to have a commodity sold and I want it to be worth that much minus that. I want all of it. I want to sell it all, and I want the worth to be, greater than the solution of a volume, right? So I want the solution to be greater than the volume. I'll take my product, I'll create a range for it that is a solution of a distributed market. So in this case, the computer can't, digitalize, market per se range. It can't, create entropy from a range or market, but can create a range from a market that has potential, right? But it's also a range and it also has a solution. It has a variance, which is like a volt solution. So there's some sort of comparison versus the volume versus the rate. So if you have an asymptotal function, right, the differential is, can I have something that is polluting the environment versus distributing to my identity of business versus the average quality of my business. Say my business is now selling bread. I now have bread in a chamber in my business equipment, right? It's basically closed, it's folded, right? It's not like slow down. It's not like a crazy experience. You're not refilling in the oxygen air, right? The solution there is the signal bends. So refractory would be a lot cheaper, but it would be poisonous. Maybe lead is considered poisonous, right? Lead is the next chain up from bread. Bread has what is like the stuff in Pepto-Bismol, the pink stuff, or the somewhat poisonous stuff, or the bread stuff. It helps you congest or digest things. It's not something your body processes, but it makes it weaker over time, basically. So basically, the distribution of that is the volume, the command of beta, right? So beta. Can my business command beta? It can command it. So it's kind of like disodium. So take disodium right here. Potential is yearns and earned through time, right? So my transactions, my actions are based on cash. cash derivatives, which is basically a Y function, a command of, let's say, I have economic progress of posting a flyer up right next to a bank. The distribution is, it's meant for, 32 people or some, amount of people. They pass by it every day. They want to read it. They have to have it. And then they say like, I want to raise, I want to be the new guy on the block. I want the distribution now. I want a new business. I want to be just like this. And you're like, I want the adverts on TV to stop now. And they're like, I want the browser in front of me to close down with my Siri device for my Alexa, for my AI control design, right? For my distribution network that controls the files on my phone, right? I want the distribution to be just like this guy's. I want to put him out of business. You're like, is that ethical? I mean, it's completely ethical. From any standpoint, any business can do it with a solution that is like, basically, soda eats soda, right? But soda doesn't eat a distribution of even function, right? So it's based on a kind of a function. It's kind of like a eulogy or kind of like a distribution function in mathematics, but it's actually formulated like a factoring of a stats system or a calculus system. The next step in that is calculus. In a way, it's kind of like a remainder of functions, derivatives, and dividends, right? Dividends, and then there's also more to it, but the weight is also ordered in the function of the market versus return in the market return, right? Which is represented as a D, right? So the D market concept, diametrical, and it becomes a distribution, a method, an effective reason for business to work, but it also is the urn of the business. So that potential is also enigmatic. So your business holds water to be sold. The distribution, flows that water. It's a portion of that water solution, and that solution becomes water over time. So basically, you have water, the sold water, the unit. I mean, you're not a business that sells to the government, so your distributions are made returns and values, right? And stay with me. I mean, say a kid is selling water bottles outside. So he's making means to meet any distribution he needs to be. He's a kid. He sells like kind of water. Like he gets it from the sink. He gets it from the faucet. I mean, it's cheaper that way, or that way he can sell the water to distribute maybe to someone who's a camper, or to somebody who is a distributor to let's say like 420 people, right? So he sits there for 2 weeks and he earns a potential of something like $900. So he has somebody who's buying water probably greater than 32 cents, and at a low average maybe he goes and gives less than 32 cents minus like 9 cents, and then he has how many? He has, let's see, 32 minus 9, so that's 7 versus 30, that's 23. There's 23 waters, right? In a distributed network, like something like a can of water back in the day, like maybe in the 1900s, like 1950, right? You'd have water that's distributed, per unit. So, the chorus, commerce effect would be, like 1 water is 1 gram versus 1 effective value of water. So 100 grains or grams of water might be a distributed unit, right? 1 can of water might be a water quality control, might be an effectiveness in water quality control, right? So that potential there is the remainder of their constant of water versus their distribution there. So, when you set up a market, let's say it doesn't exist, it's underground, it has a value that is distributed evenly, right? Not through entropy, like motion, acceleration, all of the yield, the urn of the business. So we might consider that yield, right? The yield is the positive chain reaction of the business. I'm getting somewhere with it. So the potential is kind of like, your digital typeface, your sign, and the sign says like, you're working. You are literally working. You're saying that, but it's not for every business to say they're working. It's only for distributed effectiveness to say they're working. But they also have the papers on them. They say like they're a food manager. They sell the water. They have a food license. Say they have a derivative, a food card, right? They basically say they have a distributed network they work with, or they have an effective chain of businesses they work with, and it's for the proportional method of selling goods. So the goods are commodity, commodity, or a illustrated serendipitous, what is it called, a security, right? So a security is when basically the vault, turns into a median market, especially in programming. So you have the concept here of a commodity. Was it ever commodity? Was it ever a word? I don't think it was. So it was intravenous or intravenous. So it had medicinal purposes like cola. The solution that was purposed like a tincture. Right? The tincture was like a resolution that always got found and used and distributed differently and evenly between people and their thoughts. Maybe like maybe not like syrup, but like maybe like the pollution of what is a common good, a median good. Like that's like bad bread. Right? Bad bread leads to a bad recession. Soda pop, on the other hand, had nitrosursive function. So the I to the H is the hood rat syndrome, right? Like the hood rat is like the guy who like arranges things the way he wants to, right? He's like out in the corner. He's the hood rat. Like in the colonies, or the thing, you wouldn't call it a hood rat. You call it the rotational figure, right? So this person is like selling the loaf of bread. They're normalized. They think proper. They think proper things. They do normal things. They're not the hood rat. They're the informant, right? They're the informant that divides, and that's all they are. They're divisional thinkers. So if you have an underground marketing business, for say like mine, what do? You have a divisional thinking, which is a schema set apart like anything else. Say you're assigned a number for your business team, or IUD or something like that, a business DUNS number or something. So that distribution is a volume of numbers, right? That's just a business that is DUNS. It's assigned something that is like a DUNS number should be. So the DUN number has like one lot, has another lot, has a distribution, it has a value, and it has a asymmetrical value that is ascertained by the business itself, and it needs to be functional. So it has to have a solution, which is it has to be at the same time. It can't be the next of next. It can't be now, because we've been through that, and the hood rats decided they want the stuff, right? They want the soda pop. But the soda pop isn't so simple. So let's say you divide 1 by 0. You don't really have a file directory for 1 by 0. So another example, a business doesn't just say they can't take from their bank. They got to plan it out, man. Like they can't just sell the less soda. I mean, like to be honest, like maybe like a beginner in like a business might like take their products and say like I take the last soda because I need negative to earn a potential to make work, right? So it's American syndrome. Almost. Like how do I get work, make work? How do I start a business if I can't pull a business? I can't have a business, right? I have to work to hold the business, right? So can you be a business owner and a business owner at the same time? And that's the bigger question in America. So does Trump promise, is there a business plan between business and business? The only economy I know that is selected like that, right? Or it's reselected like that, or selected. It's kind of like right? Like it doesn't say, but it's like I can see you like agreeing and 100% of that, or disagreeing with the 100% of that. It's like Israel, right? Or Israel, Gaza is kind of like that. They're the negative refractor. They are the rat kid of the rat kids, right? They're like the rat kids of Russia, right? But they're actually British, right? So the rat kids of the British, right? Versus the rat kids of like somewhere like the rat kids that are inconclusive of what it means to have nothing in their business, right? Like a true non-economy of like non-democracy, right? But the rat kids of Palestine are like the rat kids, like that make a distribution error. But the rat kids, like everywhere else, are kind of like, I can't make up my mind about the rat kids. Like I can pick up anything I want, I can do anything I want. I can do whatever I want, man. And like I'm still British. Like they are the British rat kids that say we get along. Saying that's their whole bottom mark. That's their whole value. But in a business, would you run a business like I'm in a place right now, and I'm a rat, right? Like let's say like for a metaphor, I have a friend named Matt, and he starts a business, Matt D, right? Matt Drake, right? Or Matt Dredge, right? So he basically, sits on his mountain and he says, like, I want to come down someday. I want to come down from my mountain. He's not like Mike, who is like 20% of the market, and he says, like, well, my name's Matt. Hi. I've eaten my dinner tonight, and I've like, eaten like a plate full of spaghetti. And I'm like, like Matt, like you've had enough spaghetti, man. Like you're on fire. Like your body's on fire. You're eating too much spaghetti, right? You've eaten spaghetti and you're on fire because like you keep on cooking. Like you keep on cooking the spaghetti, and you're like, you need to stop cooking the spaghetti, Matt. So basically, Matt is the only guy who can do the job. Like he's the only one. So he starts a business. He's on that mountain, man. He's on the mountain, and he starts. He's like, I want it to be, something that is like factorable. Like I want it to be, like he has a business like, Range Market here, and he's like trying to look at it. He's like, I have a business partner that put me out of business. He took all my shit, my SHIT, and he says like, I want to capitalize this market. And you're like, I can't let you do that. I'm on the mountain, man. I'm on the mountain. I'm on the biggest mountain on the earth right now, full of hydrogen, oxygen, skyrocketing, booming and booming and booming. And that mountain basically tells Matt, like, I want to start a business that is a variable X. Right? And then, like, he comes to you and gives you these commandments. And it's like, what are Matt's commandments? You're like, I didn't want any commandments, Matt. But here are your commandments, Matt. And like, like Matt, like, sits down and sits like near, like, comes down from the mountain and sits at the apple tree, right? And says like, these are my commandments. And Matt gives you commandments. He's like, this number 2673952359 does not make 20 minus something at all. It's a totally distribution loop, right? It's like based on radio waves. No man's soul can go up to any court and say like, I vote for no reason but just radio waves. I'm saying? Matt is like, saying the hypothesis of a double isn't serendipitous towards that $100 instead of pot money, right? Or the negative arrangement of that $100 instead of pot money, no matter what. It's straight up soda syrup, right? There's no return, there's no ratio, so therefore it's void. And then Matt comes down and says, like, another day, and he says, Matt, what's the new commandment here? And he says, the distributional loop, it can only equal 2. And he's like, why can only the distribution loop only equal 2? And he's like, he pops up and he says, he says, this is the distribution loop because, we're bottling this stuff now. You know what I'm saying? Like we are, we're the Matt to this ratio, and we're taking Matt down to the next level, and we say like, basically, like say it's like the Trent affair, like in Trenton from like Matt Damon's movie. Matt comes down and he says, like why do we have anything if we can't have anything? And he says like the commandment is made this way because it's weaving, it's weaving in and out, right? It's not what I want, it's the what I have to have, right? And he says commandment, Matt, and like he says like this is my next commandment. And he says things don't even or equal out the things even though you make them even things, right? And he says that's big, and then his friends agree with him. He says, these are the things I need and the things I want. And he says, this is you versus this is me, but I believe you are the one here and you'll spread my message. So you are more than one person, right? So Matt says, this is my fifth hypothesis. He says, the other ones are equal or even to the other hypothesis. And Matt says, this is the distribution of the mount itself. He says, this is my rib cage. Like you can't touch my rib cage. So he says, my business needs security. Like anybody who just starts a business, the new kid on the block. He said, if I'm a rat hood kid, this is the new kid on my block. And he says, no egg. And he says, if I'm a rat kid, you tell me one thing, but I like it wrapped, so it becomes wrapped. So basically, he takes his functions and his like potential of his business and puts it into paper that his business can. He rots the tree's fiber. He dyes it. He bleaches it, and then he basically says like these are the rat goods I give you. And he says the next play me if I will. The next commandment on my list is the fifth one. Again, he says this is the one that is going to even it out, right? He said, this is the one distribution network that I want on my business. He says, this is commandment 1. I want my business always to succeed, right? 2, I want my business to have a remainder of a negative number, no matter what and whatever potential. And it says the next one up, my negative business will never hold what I can't have. So basically, right, it will repeat itself no matter what. And my business will also say, this is what I want it to do. I want it to always do the things it say it's going to do, no matter what. So basically, he goes back up to the mount. He doesn't pride himself. He says, the mount thing is just a figurative language. This is just to tell myself, I'm the better person in this situation, and I can do everything I want to do. I can seem God to basically, the language, the framework I have, and I can also coalesce, the idea between, me and my volume or my weight and things. Or I can also say like the basic, like the lines on the ground floor, right? The people that are the lets or they're not lets, right? The people broken, right? I want the broken people to succeed no matter what. If I've learned anything, and it goes with this potential here, I want 1 to equal 0. I don't want the potential for people to succeed no matter what. And he says, I want to zero down on that mark, and I want to make capitalize. And he says, like, this is my distribution error. This is my suitcase. This is what I have. This is what my things are. And this is what I got right here. I've met you for these means to make sure there's a greater need in the world, no matter what. And he says the distribution is like, this is how I feel like I'm going to be hot fixed in the future, no matter what. So Matt goes back up to the mount again. And he says, I want this to be my spot on the mount, no matter what. And it says like this to the business owners around the community that already have business. It says, this is my place in time, and this is who I am. This is what I want, and this is what I got. I got pounds for it. It says, what I want is so insecure. I want the most graphic thing on earth to be there, and I want 14 camel wings. I want the meat to be exposed. I want animals to die. I want the peace on earth, but I want actually, I want so bad. I don't want it to happen ever again. So he says, I come down from that sloop and I say like, I didn't get shot today. And he says like, I know hood rat, but he says, basically I want the potential for the yearn, man. I want the yield of interest, and I want the interest now, man. I want this to be the first spot of like my new thing if I want it to be the new thing. And so I want it to be the new underground market. So he says, this is my new underground market, so y'all go with it. And these are his commandments. So basically he sends these commandments down, and he says, these are the distributed networks of the market, right? So he says, these are the markets, and these are the distributed networks of the markets, basically. So, I mean, if we go back down to the slow, back down to slow, this is Matt's market, this is Matt's like thoughts, Matt's reality, right? Do they hold up, in somewhere like, under Trump, right? Under Trump, he says, like, these are the set numbers, these are set markets. So, like, say this is a place. Like, what's the set market in this place? So it's a bunch of stuff. It could be this key, it could be this receptor, the Norway rat, right? Or it could be like, a place, like a distributor, like a Disney pen. This is one example of a Disney pen. So what's this next thing? What's the next thing after the next thing after that? Matt says, like, what's the zip code there? Right? He says everything is codified, so why isn't it codified? So he says the zip code is in Mexico, and like, how do we have a zip code in Mexico? And it's like, why is there no belonging in something you don't have? Matt can see more than us, but at the reality of something we can't have, because Matt says, this is the distribution that basically gets fixed in this administration. He says, if 6-2 didn't happen last jurisdiction, it doesn't mean 6-2 means like, something like, the hook, right? He says, if I can't have 62806, for example, FBI file, right? Whatever it is, the file about corruption in the government, or the Everpass, RFID signal, or the ting, and the RFID signal, the RF, right? He says, if I can't have RF now, then I don't have the thing, right? So basically, Matt says, I want, the AJ plus the newspaper to be out there, right? I want it to be out no matter what, out. He says, I don't want it now like that, but I want it like, I want it out, like, I want it like, pay out. Like, so he pays out all his money. basically. Matt goes and pays out all his money so he can get more money, basically. So basically, Matt, learned a little yarn in the interest there. So basically, Matt takes his business, which is like maybe a B&B business, right? He's running multiple businesses now. This chain reaction, he trusted an underground marketer so bad and has a system potential for being in the system of his results and his returns and his concepts of return and interest, right? It's kind of like, if you were to go from Nebraska to Mexico, is it a place? It is not a place. So ask yourself, what is the zip code in the USA? Maybe it's different. Where is that at? Well, I don't know where it's at. It's somewhere in a different city, right? So the zip code somewhere else, might be somewhere else. But the zip code apparently in Mexico, it was a different place. You know what I'm saying? So Matt comes down and he's like, that zip code isn't in the United States, so I give it oil. He says, since I give it oil, I have a precipitate, I have a value, and I have a balance. He says, I hire a wiper to wipe all my stuff down. He says, if this is lenient, then this is congressional. If this is congressional, this is my network. And so therefore the network is my differentiation of the network itself. And he says, this is Palanview. And he says it's slang for Plainview. He says, if the palm holds up, man, he says, then me is me as is me as is me. So he says, one distribution equals 10. And he says, I break all the rules to get all the rules and have all the rules. And he says, this is now what I want. He says, I want the radio to work like it did, but I want it to function the same way it did. Saying better. He wants a solution to be, the return of the value versus the function of the differential. This equation, right? This equation is the differential between, letting or taking, he says. He says, I don't want anything to be taken. I want it to be negative and negative. He says, if I had a business partner that said that, or if I had a business I hired that, I would hire him right away. He says, I want that to be the full sum of the full value. He says, I want it to be in the full value versus the natural sum. And then the business cuts off and he says, no, Matt, I don't follow your sum. You've broken your own command. He says, what's the best thing that you can't have versus one thing you can? And I said, Matt says, one thing I can't have, and he comes down from his mouth, and he says, I can't, have your business. And he wants to buy your business now. Almost like buying up the identity of, who you are. Right? And Matt comes down from his commandments and says, if Matt says, one thing, things must get real small in life. And he says, that's another commandment. Businesses are always small. Businesses are always the weakest point, the weakest link. If they can't have any weak, funding, if they can't have any weak potential, they don't have no yearn, they don't have no potential at all. And Matt comes down from his mount again the next day and says, this is my earned potential. And I don't recreate it, man. I just let it sit on the market. He says, every business must have a business that sits money in the market. And he says, that, we call clear functions in economics, right? He says, simply, these functions that are values in those, base derivatives, right? They must sit in the market to create a return versus the value of the discrete market. Basically. He says, one can't be divided by zero. There's no market to have a hedge in. He says that's level versus level thinking. He says, even if you put it in a distribution versus a volume. He says, what's that volume? He said, freedom of speech, man. He said, that volume is me getting on that mountain and going on that computer, man. He says, that's me opening up the RAM file on my computer and damaging the circuit right there, right? He says, that circuit isn't me sounding this is the institution versus the value of a manifestation file. This is me diverging my portfolio and the average return versus the median market of the value of the market itself based on the exact measurement of those radio waves at the exact moment so that it don't come down to Earth the wrong way. So that goes back to the mountain and says, this is the steam measurement I have now, and then he never comes back. Or basically, the equipment wasn't fixed, basically. He says, I have nothing to do with LF signals. He says, I have nothing to do with any RF signals. I have nothing to do with any EP signals. He says, like, this is my new distribution network, and this is my new commandment here. And he says, like, what do I want? And he says, I can't have it now, so I go pop. He says, I go back to Georgia, and I go do the thing I want to do, and I do it now, and I do it in order, and I can't have the thing I can't have, so I can't have it. So he says that because he says, if I wanted to hire some guy named Ziggy AJ Tigman or whatever his name is, right? He says I can't have it unless he's the least correct man. But he doesn't say it like that. He says he's the best solution for the job because he has no solution at all. He has nothing. He has no money to his name. He has no personality. He has nothing. And he says, Matt, what do I call this? And he says, like, I want it to be considered lightning speed. I want this now not to be a person. I want it to be the velocity of sound catching up to the potential of the yearn, the potential of the zero set sum, of the zero set function, of the value that you left in your market derivative. And he says, like, I want the function to be the pentameter of the thing that's equal to the money I can hold. And he says, I want that to be the transactional error right now. And he says 1 equals 0, 1 equals 0. So Matt goes back to his slum, and he goes back to his market up on the hill. He's now built a market on his mount. And he says that distribution is now the solution you got and the solution you can't have. The demise of a market is now the volume you can't have. Basically, it's a square root of something that's like, based on the proportion of 56 proportion of entropy. He says, like, if I can't have no sum, I can't have any balance that is replicated if I can't have an equal sum. He says that is like, this is a composition. This is the value of like something that is greater than the volume of something that's easy. So we write down easy, right? The volume of easy. And he says, I've had too much today. You know what I'm saying? He's been drinking like the water on the mountain. He says, like, this is like furious, like water. It's a solution I can't just drink all the time. So So Matt goes back up to that mountain. And he says, like, I sit here with, like, my can in hand, what I'm saying? Like, I was selling soda pop at one time in my life. I was pulling bread from this transactional error. And I have this distribution, network, and I have the value I want. So basically, he says, I want the values I can have forever, and I want them to last forever, no matter what, and no matter what. He says the weight of volume doesn't equal the weight of gram. And he says, this is the distribution, and I want it to be equal to 5.75. Now it says, why 5.75? Because it's the estimated volume you can make. It won't do nothing but anything. It basically is a pentameter for the open, distribution it creates, which is, based on, everything, right? Not the covalent bonds, but the distribution of, the whole volume, he says. And he says, I'm not going to describe the volume. It's my free speech and not resolved to the volume based on the potential of a volume, right? And he says, why? Because the market says we have no resolute market. This is all distributed independent on, a common good or common market. We don't want common goods or common markets. And he's like, why is that? He's like, because my common, good or market in my distribution, it's based on capitalism, on freedom, on democracy. He says, why do I want that? Why? Because I want my distributed network to tell me where my things are made. I want it to tell me, who I am. I want it to tell me, I want my product to be out there. I want it to be wrapped, and I don't want it to be copied, no matter what. My way. I don't want my land to be stolen. I don't want the parts to be taken. I don't want the direction toward my, my product to be not recreated. I want it to be recreated by as many people as possible. He says, I want that distribution to be even, man. And he says, I don't want to even have to use a wrap. I want people's things to be wrapped no matter what, and I want the distribution to be there. And he says, I want to live in the mountain forever. So he sits there until basically, one thing happens. And he says, this is, who I am. This is what I hold, everyone. So he starts telling people to write this stuff down. So basically, he sits there and he starts writing all of it down. He's writing it down and down and down and down and down. He's like, "What is this? What is this to my business? What is this business to me? What is this montage to the business I'm making? Who can I make? What can I do? What can I say? What can I think?" And he says, like, "Why don't I dissolve my business?" So he dissolves his business. He sits there and he leaves it there and he dissolves his business. He's been doing business with like people who are doing businesses, like just individuals doing business, basically. So he sits there, he does his business, and he sits there and he sits there and he sits there and he sits there for almost eternity, right? He comes down, but it's not eternal. He sits there, it's only been like however long, right? And he says, this is who I am. So therefore, this is what I'm about. So basically, Matt, he comes down, he says, I forgot who I am. I forgot what my business is, and I forgot what I'm doing in the world. He says, I'm an esoterian, whatever that means. He says, I've become, a problematic, feature in my own, progress of, functioning the organization I'm trying to make, right? That's the organization which is now. He says, I don't want my business to sit up on the mountain anymore because I don't have breathing room, right? He says, I can't sit there because I don't have anything to breathe for. I don't have anything in my causality to say I can't come down from the mountain. And I can't bring my Volvo buck up to the mountain. It sits down there. It sits and it says, I can't have nothing. I can't buy more Volvos because they'll get stolen. They'll get sold off to the other markets. He says, I can't have the driver's license without that thing. He says, why is that? Because the Volvo itself is basically, it's collecting all the energy I put in there. It's the positive vibe. So it's the positive potential, or it's the volume of, the direction of the potential. But I don't want it to go out there like that because it can't ever go out there like that. It's the motive of this vehicle. They should not sell it anymore. So they shall not sell it anymore. He says, why is that? He says, the potential is my earned interest, man. My earned interest is the total amount versus the total amount of sum I hold. And he says, why is that? He says, because it's gram positive no matter what. He says, if I were to roll over in a crash right now, I wouldn't be able to afford any metal in my car because of the Volvo. And he says, why is that? He says, because people left my car alone one night and they broke my windshield. They took in my VIN, and then they said, this is my earned potential, and this is my volume. But he just didn't say it like that. He said it was it was the low 50 to my Volvo. He said, this is my distribution, so therefore, I'll come back big someday. But I won't come back big the other days. He says, when I come down to the Volvo, I have to think small because it is the only thing to flip this number over. So he goes to work with that Volvo. He drives to work. He has that family with the Volvo. He has that ORN. He has that VIN number at that Volvo. He has the license with that Volvo. He goes to work in that Volvo, even if it is working on that Volvo. It's like he works in his own auto shop with that Volvo. It says this is the only potential. We'll flip these potentials together and say, these are the potentials of my Volvo, man. So he says, why is that? He says, because I crashed this Volvo to another Volvo one day. He says this potential is the Volvo because it's the only distribution to reset the network. So he says, this is infinite. This is my choice. He says, this is my choice until there's a new solution found, right? So he takes his license, he accidentally loses it. He comes back, he gets another license, he works with a new car. And then he gets a new license after that when the Real ID moves on up. And then when his new identity is secure, he remembers who he is, right? Because it is what it is. And then he basically, it goes down. So, and then he destroyed the commandments, and then Matt leaves the commandments, and he says, this is the distributed who I am. And this is what I do, and this is what I say, and this is what's going to happen. Basically, it becomes two parts of something, right? It comes from the west to the east, right?